The Queen's flagship cut through the darkness of space, its silver hull catching the light of a distant sun. Inside, corridors gleamed with alien metals, and soldiers in ornate armor moved with quiet discipline. The air was heavy with the scent of ozone from the ship's energy cores, and every step echoed with power and authority. In the center of it all was the throne room, where Queen Saraya, ruler of the Valkar Dominion, stood in silence. Her emerald skin glowed faintly under the crystal lights, her fiery hair cascading down over her shoulder like a river of flame. In the lower decks, deep behind reinforced doors, a human prisoner sat chained to the wall. His name was Kale, a soldier from a war that had ended badly for his side. Captured months ago, he had been moved from one alien world to another, finally ending up on the Valkar flagship. No one spoke to him except the guards, and even they avoided eye contact. To the crew, he was nothing more than a dangerous animal in a cage. The silence of the ship shattered when alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the corridors, and the calm rhythm of the crew turned to chaos. Voices shouted orders over the comms. Saraya's golden eyes narrowed as she listened to the incoming reports. Pirate ships, armed to the teeth, had appeared from hyperspace and were closing fast. These were not the common raiders that plagued the outer systems. Their ships were heavy, well-armed, and painted with the black insignia of the Dreadborn Corsairs. Outside, space lit up with streaks of blue and red as the first shots were fired. Energy shields flared under the impact and the vibration of heavy weapons echoed through the decks. Crew members stumbled as explosions rocked the ship. Somewhere below, a bulkhead gave way, sending smoke and sparks into the air. The enemy was not aiming to disable. They were here to kill and loot everything they could before vanishing back into the void. In the brig, Kale felt the ship lurch violently. A chunk of ceiling plating fell dangerously close to him, scattering metal fragments at his feet. Two guards rushed past the cell, shouting to each other in their alien tongue. The ship shook again, harder this time, and the lights flickered. Kale tested his chains and felt one anchor groan against the wall. Something was failing in the ship's structure, and it was happening fast. Up on the command deck, Saraya stood before a glowing display table, watching enemy ships swarm like predators circling prey. Her fleet escorts were either destroyed or scattered. The flagship stood alone. She ordered her crew to prepare boarding defenses, knowing the Corsairs would try to storm the ship once the shields failed. Her voice was calm, but inside she knew the truth. If they breached the command deck, the fight would be over in minutes. The pirates hit the ship with a concentrated volley. The shields collapsed in a burst of white light, and the outer hull groaned under the pressure of boarding clamps locking into place. Metal screeched as docking tubes latched on. The sound of heavy boots thudding through the corridors was followed by the roar of alien war cries. Saraya's guards moved to intercept, but the pirates were fast, brutal, and outnumbered them in every hall they entered. In the brig, a blast rocked the door, and two pirates stormed in, weapons raised. Kale didn't wait. He lunged forward, using the slack in his chain to trip the first one, slamming him to the ground. The second swung a blade at him, but Kale twisted away, grabbed the weapon, and drove the hilt into the attacker's throat. As both pirates lay stunned, Kale yanked hard on the damaged anchor point until the chain broke free. For the first time in months, his wrists were unshackled. He didn't know why, but instead of running for escape, he turned toward the sound of battle. Somewhere above him, the Queen was fighting for her life, and he was heading straight into the storm. Kale moved through the smoke-filled corridor, stepping over the bodies of pirates and crew alike. The air was thick with the smell of burnt metal and scorched armor. He gripped the stolen blade tightly, every muscle tense as he listened for movement ahead. The ship groaned under the weight of battle, each sound reminding him that the fight was far from over. Around the next corner, two pirates were dragging a wounded Valkar soldier toward the docking tubes. Kale's steps were silent as he closed the distance. He struck fast, the blade cutting through the first pirate's weapon arm, sending the alien screaming to the floor. The second pirate turned in shock, only to meet Kale's shoulder crashing into his chest. The fight ended in seconds, and Kale pulled the injured soldier to safety. The soldier stared at him in disbelief, eyes narrowing in confusion. "You are human," the alien said through bloodied lips. Kale gave a brief nod, checking the hull for threats. He had no time to explain why he was helping. He simply pointed toward a safer passage and urged the soldier to go. The Valkar hesitated for a heartbeat before running, his armor clanging against the deck as he vanished into the haze. Kale pressed forward, following the sound of weapons fire and the screams of defiance. The deeper he went, the hotter the air grew, as if the ship itself were burning from within. He spotted a group of pirates forcing open a blast door that led toward the throne chamber. Their leader barked orders in a guttural tongue, his cybernetic arm gleaming under the emergency lights. Kale knew that if they breached that door, the Queen would be trapped. He rushed them without warning. The first pirate fell with a single strike to the neck. Kale grabbed the leader's cybernetic arm and twisted hard until the joint tore loose in a shower of sparks. The rest tried to fight, but Kale's movements were sharp and efficient, honed from years of combat. Within moments, the pirates lay sprawled across the floor, their weapons scattered. Kale kicked the ret door controls until the blast door slid shut again, sealing the path. Inside the throne chamber, Queen Soraya was surrounded by her personal guards, holding off wave after wave of intruders. Her energy spear moved like lightning, each strike dropping another pirate. Her hair whipped around her face as she fought, her armor glinting in the flames that had begun to crawl along the walls. She had no idea Kale was only a few halls away, cutting his way toward her. With relentless determination, Kale's path finally led him to a side entrance of the throne chamber. The doors had been blown apart, leaving jagged metal edges. He stepped through and saw the Queen in the center of the chaos, her guards slowly falling one by one. A massive pirate brute with scaled skin and twin axes bore down on her. She turned to block, but her stance faltered for a fraction of a second. Kale did not think, he moved. He slammed into the brute's side, knocking the alien off balance. The axes clanged to the floor, and Kale drove his blade into the pirate's chest. The enemy roared before collapsing with a heavy thud. Soraya's golden eyes widened as she saw who stood before her. For a moment, the noise of battle seemed to fade between them. Then another wave of pirates poured in through the broken doors, and there was no time for words. Fighting side by side, they pushed back against the attackers. Soraya's spear flashed in arcs of light, while Kale's blade cut through the enemy. With brutal precision, the deck became slick with the remains of battle. Finally, the last pirate fell, silence broken only by the crackle of fire and the distant groan of the ship's hull. Soraya lowered her weapon, still breathing hard, her gaze locked on the human who had just saved her life. Smoke curled in the air as Kale and Soraya stood among the bodies of the fallen. The deck trembled beneath their feet, a reminder that the battle outside was still raging. Soraya's gaze lingered on the human, her expression unreadable. Her guards, what few remained, looked between the two with wary eyes. None of them could understand why a prisoner had just saved their queen. "Why are you here?" Soraya asked, her voice steady but carrying a dangerous edge. Kale met her eyes, the firelight flickering across his face. "Because if you die, none of us make it out alive," he replied. There was no time to explain more, and he doubted she would believe him even if he tried. The Queen gave a single nod, then turned toward the main exit where more shouting echoed. The next wave of pirates burst into the corridor outside. Soraya led the charge, her spear moving with deadly precision. Kale followed at her side, his blade cutting through armor and flesh alike. The corridor became a brutal gauntlet of steel and blood. The pirates fought hard, but they had not expected resistance this fierce from a cornered prey. Slowly, the tide began to turn in favor of the defenders. They reached a junction where the air shimmered with heat from a ruptured power conduit. Sparks rained down, casting the metal walls in an orange glow. Saraya signaled for her guards to secure the hall, but Kale noticed something else. One of the pirates had slipped away down a side corridor, carrying a heavy satchel. His instincts screamed that it was important. Without a word, he broke away to follow. The chase led him through a half-collapsed passage littered with debris. The pirate moved fast despite the weight of the satchel, glancing back only once before vanishing into a cargo bay. Kale entered moments later to find the pirate arming a powerful explosive. The timer flashed red, counting down the final seconds. Kale lunged, tackling the alien to the ground. They struggled fiercely, but Kale managed to wrench the detonator free and smash it under his boot. When he returned to the junction, Saraya's guards were clearing the last of the attackers. She turned sharply when she saw him, eyes narrowing at the sight of the broken device in his hand. "They meant to destroy the ship from the inside," Kale said plainly. Saraya's gaze softened for just a heartbeat before she turned back to the fight ahead. "Stay close to me," she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. Together they pushed toward the command deck. The halls grew wider here, the walls lined with intricate carvings and glowing symbols of the Valkars. Long history. Many of those symbols were now scarred by blaster fire and scorched by flames. The sounds of battle were louder, mixed with the distant roar of engines straining under damage. The command deck was still holding, but it was clear the pirates were closing in. As they approached, a massive explosion shook the ship, sending both Kale and Saraya crashing against the wall. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the artificial gravity wavered, lifting them slightly before slamming them back. "Down," a voice crackled over the comms, warning that the outer hull on the starboard side had been breached. The Queen's eyes narrowed. If the pirates gained control of that breach, they would have a direct path to the ship's heart. Saraya moved with renewed urgency, Kale keeping pace beside her. They arrived at a blast door where a squad of Valkar soldiers fought to hold their ground. The enemy beyond the door was pressing hard, their numbers too great for the defenders to hold for long. Saraya stepped forward, her presence alone rallying her troops. Kale took position at her side, his blade ready. When the doors buckled and the pirates poured through, they met a wall of steel and fury. The fight was relentless, every strike and parry costing them precious energy. But Kale and Saraya fought as if they had trained together for years, their movements instinctively covering one another. The pirates began to falter, their confidence shattered by the unyielding resistance. When the last enemy fell, silence washed over the battered hallway. Saraya turned to Kale, her breathing heavy but her eyes steady. "You fight like one of us," she said quietly. The hallway was quiet now, but the smell of blood and smoke still hung in the air. Kale wiped his blade on the armor of a fallen pirate before sliding it back into his belt. Saraya gave orders to her guards, directing them to secure the surrounding sections. Every move she made was sharp and decisive, the mark of a leader who knew how to survive in war. Kale could see the weight of responsibility in her eyes. As they moved toward the command deck, the lights overhead flickered again. A deep metallic groan echoed through the ship, and Kale could feel the vibration under his boots. "Hull pressure is unstable," Saraya muttered to herself. Kale glanced at her but said nothing, letting her thoughts remain her own. The deck. A head tilted slightly, forcing them both to adjust their steps before continuing. The command deck doors loomed ahead, guarded by two soldiers with plasma rifles. They stepped aside at the Queen's approach, their eyes scanning Kale with suspicion. Inside, the deck was a storm of movement officers shouting reports, screens flashing warnings, and the main view screen showing pirate vessels circling like wolves. The ship's weapons were firing, but damage indicators glowed red across every system. Saraya took her place at the center of the deck, her voice cutting through the chaos as she issued commands. Kale stood near the entrance, scanning every corner for threats. He noticed the way the crew looked at their queen with both fear and trust, knowing she was the only one holding their world together. He also noticed the empty space where more guards should have been. The enemy had taken more from them than anyone wanted to admit. A sudden tremor shook the deck as a pirate boarding craft smashed into the outer hull. The lights dimmed then, flared back to life as systems rerouted power. A crewman shouted that the enemy had breached near the reactor level. Saraya's head snapped toward the report, and her orders came instantly. Seal every corridor leading to the core. I will not let them destroy my ship. Kale could hear the steel in her voice. She turned to him then, her expression unreadable. You are not my soldier, but you fight as if my life is yours to guard, she said. Kale met her gaze and shrugged. You needed help. I was there. For a moment, the noise of the deck faded, replaced by an unspoken understanding between them. Saraya nodded once, then turned back to her officers, her focus shifting to the next move in their fight. The ship shuddered violently, knocking several crew members to the floor. The view screen showed one of the pirate ships breaking away from the fight, heading toward the Valkar's escape pods. Saraya's eyes narrowed in realization. If the pirates took the pods, they could capture her surviving officers. Without hesitation, she ordered Kale and a small strike team to intercept. He didn't question her decision, he simply grabbed a rifle from the weapons rack and moved out. They moved quickly through the corridors, their boots pounding against the metal deck. The sounds of distant fighting echoed around them, mixed with the hiss of damaged pipes venting steam. At the junction ahead, the team split into two groups, each heading for different access points to the escape pod bays. Kale's group arrived first, only to find the pirates already forcing open the pod doors. Without waiting for orders, he charged. The fight was short and brutal. Kale's rifle barked fire, dropping two pirates before they could react. The rest tried to retreat, but the Valkar soldiers cut them down before they reached cover. When the last body fell, Kale checked the pods, making sure they were still operational. His breath came heavy, but his focus never wavered. This was not over, and he knew it. Somewhere out there, the pirates still had the advantage in numbers. A voice came over the comms, warning that the enemy leader had been sighted on the upper decks. Saraya's voice followed, ordering all available forces to converge. Kale looked at the soldiers around him and motioned for them to move. He didn't know who this leader was, but he understood one thing: the battle would only end when that pirate was either captured or dead. Kale pushed forward through the upper corridors, his steps quick and measured. The air was hotter here, filled with the sharp tang of overheated metal. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound a warning. He kept his rifle ready, eyes scanning each doorway and corner for movement. The enemy leader was somewhere ahead, and Kale intended to find him. Saraya's voice came over the comms, calm but firm. She was coordinating from the command deck, moving her troops into position to trap the pirate forces. Kale listened for her orders, adjusting his route to match her plan. It was strange to be taking commands from someone he had met only during battle, yet her voice carried the authority of someone who inspired trust. He followed it without hesitation. At the next junction, Kale spotted signs of recent fighting. Scorch marks lined the walls, and broken weapons littered the floor. A trail of blood led toward a set of reinforced doors. He signaled for the two Valkar soldiers with him to flank the entrance. Together, they burst through, weapons raised. Inside, the pirate leader stood tall, his armor black and jagged like the hull of his ship, eyes glowing faintly under the dim lights. The leader grinned, revealing rows of sharp teeth. He held a massive energy axe in one hand, resting it casually against his shoulder. "A human," he said in a deep, mocking tone. Kale didn't answer. He simply adjusted his stance, rifle aimed at the center of the pirate's chest. The leader's movements were slow but deliberate, his confidence clear. He had no intention of running. He was here to kill. Kale fired first, but the pirate moved with surprising speed, deflecting the shot with the axe's blade. The two Valkar soldiers tried to flank, but the leader swung in a wide arc, sending them crashing to the floor. Kale dropped his rifle, drawing his blade instead. He closed the distance in a burst of speed, striking low, but the pirates' armor absorbed most of the impact. Sparks flew as steel met energy. The fight became a brutal exchange of blows, the clang of weapons echoing through the chamber. Kale ducked under a swing, driving his shoulder into the pirate's ribs. The alien barely flinched, backhanding Kale hard enough to send him into the wall. Pain flared through his side, but he forced himself back to his feet. He could not let this fight end in defeat, not with Saraya depending on him. The pirate advanced, raising the axe high for a finishing strike. Kale sidestepped, grabbing the alien's arm and twisting hard. The weapon clattered to the floor, and Kale slammed his elbow into the pirate's jaw. The leader staggered, but his massive hand shot out, wrapping around Kale's throat. Pressure tightened, spots dancing in Kale's vision, until he managed to drive his blade upward into the alien's side. The grip loosened instantly. Kale pulled the blade free and kicked the pirate back. The leader snarled, stumbling toward the fallen axe, but Kale was faster. He grabbed the weapon and swung with both hands, the blade cutting deep into the pirate's chest. The alien roared once before collapsing, the light fading from his eyes. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Kale's ragged breathing. The fight was over. Saraya's voice came through the comms again, this time with relief. Reports of pirate forces retreating filled the background noise. Kale informed her that the leader was dead, and there was a long pause before she spoke. "Again, hold your position. I am coming to you." Her tone was different now, less formal, as though the battlefield had shifted something between them. When she arrived minutes later, Saraya stepped over the fallen pirate and looked directly at Kale. Her expression was a mix of pride and curiosity. "You have earned your place here," she said simply. Kale gave a small nod, wiping the sweat from his brow. Around them, Valkar soldiers secured the area, their movements steady and sure. For the first time since the attack began, the ship felt like it might survive. The ship's corridors were quieter now, but the silence carried the weight of what had just happened. The smell of smoke lingered, and the walls bore the marks of heavy fighting. Kale walked beside Saraya as they made their way back toward the command deck. Every soldier they passed paused to bow to their queen before casting curious glances at the human walking with her. None of them spoke, but their eyes told a story of disbelief and respect. On the command deck, the remaining officers were working to stabilize the ship. Screens showed damage maps and voices called out reports of systems slowly coming back online. Saraya moved among them, giving short, decisive orders. Kale stood near the main view screen, watching the pirate ships retreat into the darkness of space. The stars beyond looked calm again, but Kale knew the danger had not truly passed. The queen approached him after speaking to her officers. "You killed their leader. That alone may keep them away for a time," she said. Kale nodded, but his gaze stayed fixed on the stars. "They'll come back, or others will try. That's the way of people like them." Saraya studied him for a moment before answering. "Then we will be ready for them." Her voice carried a certainty that left no room for doubt. A sudden alert flashed on the tactical screen, pulling their attention. One of the retreating pirate ships had broken formation and was circling back. Its engines burned hotter than before, and its course pointed directly at the Valkar flagship. Kale stepped closer to the display. "They're going to ram us," he said. Saraya immediately ordered the gunners to fire, but the enemy ship moved too fast, weaving through their defensive fire. Impact alarms screamed through the deck as the pirate vessel smashed into one of the lower hangars. The collision shook the ship violently, throwing several crew members to the floor. Emergency lights bathed the deck in red as damage reports came in. Saraya wasted no time. "Seal off the hangar. I want every soldier in that sector armed and ready." Kale was already moving toward the nearest weapons rack before she finished speaking. He armed himself with a heavier rifle and followed a squad of Valkar soldiers toward the lower levels. The air grew thicker with heat as they neared the hangar, and the sounds of battle reached them long before they arrived. When the doors slid open, Kale saw a fresh wave of pirates pouring into the ship, their weapons flashing in the smoky air. Without hesitation, he charged into the fight. The hangar became a brutal arena. Blaster fire lit up the shadows, and the clang of steel rang out where close combat took over. Kale moved like a force of nature, his rifle cutting down enemies before they could regroup. Around him, Valkar soldiers fought with renewed spirit, matching his pace and ferocity. Each step pushed the pirates back toward the wreck of their own ship. One pirate broke from the fight, sprinting toward a console near the far wall. Kale saw the glint of a detonator in his hand and fired before the alien could reach it. The shot dropped him instantly, the detonator clattering harmlessly to the floor. Kale picked it up and tossed it aside, scanning the hangar for any more threats. The pirates were fewer now, and their resistance began to crumble. Finally, the last of the attackers fell, and the hangar fell silent except for the crackle of small fires. The surviving Valkar soldiers began securing the area, pulling weapons and supplies from the wrecked pirate vessel. Kale leaned against a crate, catching his breath, when Saraya entered with a small group of guards. She looked over the scene, her eyes settling on Kale before she spoke. "You've saved my ship twice today," she said. Kale didn't answer right away. He simply nodded, his breathing still heavy from the fight. Around them, the crew moved with quiet efficiency, working to repair the damage and restore order. For the first time since the ambush began, Saraya allowed herself a small smile. It was not the smile of a ruler victorious, but of a warrior who had found an ally where she least expected it. The hangar doors were sealed again, but the ship still shook from distant impacts. Damage control teams moved quickly through the lower decks, patching breaches and sealing ruptured systems. Kale followed Saraya as she returned to the command deck, both moving at a steady pace through the winding corridors. The air was filled with the faint hiss of venting gases and the hum of overworked engines. Neither of them spoke until they reached the lift. On the command deck, the crew worked with urgent precision. Screens showed the pirate fleet retreating further into the darkness, but several red markers remained, indicating ships that were still in range. Saraya gave orders to focus fire on those stragglers, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had fought too many battles to show fear. Kale stood near the main tactical display, watching the markers vanish one by one as the guns found their targets. When the last enemy ship disappeared from the map, a wave of relief washed over the room. Officers exchanged glances but remained at their stations, knowing repairs and security checks would continue for hours. Saraya moved to stand beside Kale. "The worst is over," she said quietly. Kale nodded but did not let his guard drop. "They'll tell others about this. Next time, they may come with more ships." Saraya met his gaze, her eyes sharp with understanding. She turned to her crew. "Double the watch rotations. No ship comes within range without my permission," she ordered. The officers responded immediately, sending commands across the network. Kale could see that the Queen's presence alone kept the crew steady. Even battered and bloodied, They worked without hesitation, their loyalty to her unshaken. It was a rare kind of leadership, the kind forged in the middle of fire. A sudden transmission came through, heavily encrypted. The communications officer hesitated before announcing it was from a Valkar outpost on the edge of their territory. Soraya ordered it on screen. The image flickered before revealing a shaken commander, warning that another pirate fleet was gathering larger than the one they had just faced. Kale's expression hardened as the message ended. "They're not finished," he said. Soraya's jaw tightened. "Then neither are we," she replied. She turned to Kale, her tone shifting from command to something closer to request. "Will you fight with us again if they come?" Kale studied her for a moment. He thought of the crew he had fought beside, the ship he had nearly died defending, and the queen who had stood at his side through it all. His answer was simple. "Yes," he said. The queen's eyes held his for a moment longer before she gave a single nod. She then turned her attention back to the crew, ordering preparations for a potential second engagement. Supplies were inventoried, weapon systems recalibrated, and damaged sections reinforced. Kale assisted where he could, his presence among the soldiers no longer questioned. Whatever he had been when he first stepped out of the brig, he was no longer just a prisoner. As the hours passed, the ship began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a fortress preparing for the next storm. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, and the damage from the ambush slowly disappeared under layers of repair work. Kale walked the corridors, noting the determined expressions of the soldiers he passed. Many offered respectful nods, a silent acknowledgement of the role he had played in saving them. When he returned to the command deck, Soraya was standing alone at the main viewport. The stars stretched endlessly before her, cold and unblinking. Kale stepped up beside her, his gaze following hers into the void. "They'll come from out there," he said. She didn't look at him, but her voice was steady. "And when they do, we will be ready to break them." There was no doubt in her words, only conviction. In that quiet moment, Kale realized something had changed between them. She was no longer the distant ruler he had once viewed as part of the enemy. She was a commander who fought in the front lines, a leader who inspired loyalty, and someone he would not hesitate to stand beside again. The thought settled in his mind with a weight that felt both certain and unshakable. The next day, the ship moved through quiet space, but every member of the crew knew the peace would not last. Repair teams finished their work, and the smell of fresh metal replaced the scent of burned circuits. Kale stood on the observation deck, looking out at the distant stars. He had no orders for the moment, but his thoughts were fixed on the fight. They knew was coming. Soraya approached without a sound, her step soft against the polished floor. She stood beside him, her gaze following his toward the dark stretch of space. "We have word from our scouts," she said. "The pirate fleet is on the move. They will reach us in less than a day." Kale turned his head slightly to meet her eyes. "Then we need to make sure they never reach anyone else," he replied. The queen led him back to the command deck, where preparations were already underway. The crew moved like a single machine, loading weapons, reinforcing shields, and mapping possible attack routes. Kale noticed how every order Soraya gave was carried out instantly. This was not just loyalty, it was belief. Her people trusted her to lead them through whatever storm came next. Hours passed as the ship closed the distance toward the incoming threat. The tactical display lit up with enemy signatures, dozens of them, more than Kale had ever faced. Yet, he felt no fear. He had fought with these soldiers, seen their courage, and stood beside their queen. If this was the battle that would decide their fate, he was ready to see it through. When the pirate fleet came into range, the first exchange of fire lit up the darkness. Beams of energy cut through the void, striking shields and tearing into hulls. The Valkar flagship shook with each impact, but its guns roared in answer. Kale manned one of the forward stations, his hands steady as he targeted the enemy ships. Pressing too close. One after another, they fell under the coordinated fire. The pirates fought hard, swarming from every direction, but Saraya's orders turned the chaos into a strategy. She drew them in close where the flagship's heavy weapons could do the most damage. Kale saw the plan unfold and adjusted his fire to support it, taking out ships that tried to break formation. The space outside became a storm of light and wreckage. One massive pirate vessel broke through the defensive line, its weapons locked on the flagship's bridge. Without hesitation, Kale abandoned his station and rushed to the outer decks, joining a boarding team heading for the incoming threat. They launched in a small assault craft, weaving through debris until they reached the enemy ship. The moment the hatch opened, Kale led the charge inside. The corridors of the pirate vessel were narrow and filled with resistance. Blaster fire flashed in the dark as Kale and the Valkar soldiers cut their way forward. Every step brought them closer to the enemy's control center. Finally, they breached the main chamber, where the pirate captains coordinated their attack. Kale moved without hesitation, striking down the nearest officer before turning his blade on the next. By the time the fight was over, the pirate vessel was without command. Kale signaled for extraction, and the Valkar flagship's guns finished the job, tearing the enemy ship apart. When he returned to the bridge, Saraya was there to meet him. Her golden eyes met his, and for a long moment, no words were needed. She simply placed a hand on his shoulder before turning back to the tactical display. With their flagship destroyed and their ranks broken, the remaining pirate ships scattered. The battle was over, and the space around them was finally silent. Saraya gave the order to stand down, and the crew began their work of recovery. Kale remained on the bridge, watching as the stars slowly reclaimed the void. For the first time since his capture, he felt like he belonged somewhere, not as a prisoner, but as a warrior who had earned his place.